Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Podcast on D-Shot with the birthday of my favorite composer and America's March King, John Philip Sousa, coming up. I wanted to do a couple podcasts relating to Sousa, and so far I've had Laura Shishel from the music division at the Library of Congress. I've also had the director of the President's Own United States Marine Band, and Jason Fedig, and now I bring on somebody who's probably one of the main reasons that I'm passionate about Sousa. So I bring on one of probably the biggest authority on John Philip Sousa and the Sousa impressionist himself, Keith Brion, on for my next podcast on Sousa. Keith, it's an absolute honor to have you on.
Same for me. Thank you.
All right. So where I kind of start things is obviously with you, you kind of toured around the country and the world. So maybe I can get a little bit more of a deeper answer on this first question. Where do you see Sousa among the most impactful composers and musicians in our country's history? And then where have you kind of seen the impact around the world?
Well, it's a tough question, isn't it? I mean, in what way? And among other composers, among other musicians, in other countries, all of the above, I guess.
Okay. It's like who else would you kind of have on your list as like who has had the most impact? I know John Williams has kind of come up a ton with Loris and Jason.
Well, certainly in a contemporary sense, yes, I think that's true. Victor Herbert toward the end of Sousa's life and after that was a huge influence in this country, both with his touring orchestra and his compositions.
Okay. I've asked this question because I kind of came up with it when I was interviewing Loris. What aspects of our multimedia age do you think Sousa would like now? Obviously, when Sousa was alive, he was such a proponent for the live performances, but he wasn't a fan of the recording side of things because it just wasn't up to where, obviously where we have it today. Just what kind of aspects of multimedia these days do you think Sousa would like?
Well, in the 20s, he was beginning to broadcast on the radio, so he wasn't against technology. And I suspect he would have been on television quite a bit if he were alive today. So I don't think if you transpose him into our time today, I think he would have definitely been on televised performances.
Do you think he would have, one of the things when I kind of think about that, it's kind of like, obviously these days, obviously if the Marine Band does stuff on YouTube and does live streaming, I think he would have been a huge proponent of that.
I would think so, yes.
Okay. I guess what would be your favorite pop culture reference to Sousa? I know there's the Monty Python using Liberty Bell. I was watching the Captain America movie, first Avenger movie, where Saber and Spurs pops up in the movie, which felt a little interesting. We took a trip to Disney when I was in high school, and there's the patriotic section of the Magic Kingdom that was playing Comrades to the Legion and a couple other Sousa marches in the park. So I guess what kind of pop culture reference kind of sticks out to you when it comes to Sousa's music?
Oh, I don't know. Certainly the Monty Python one.
Okay. All right. Obviously, for those who don't know, Keith was director at Yale in the 1970s, and you strolled upon this book, the John Philip Sousa American Phenomenon book, and you kind of were interested in doing some sort of different concert at Yale, and you tried to do kind of a Sousa recreation concerts with the Yale bands, and then you guys took it to New York, you took it to Carnegie, then one thing led to the next. So where did kind of the new Sousa band start? Did you start just kind of doing those concerts with symphony orchestras, or what was the kind of the impact that the Yale concerts had when you had them?
Well, I had an opportunity to do one of those programs in Wilmington, Delaware, at the old Grand Opera House, and we hired the Allentown Band. I did it with them. It was quite successful. this was at the even before my traveling career started. And then we did it again with the new Sousa Band actually playing after the new Sousa Band began. So it's been, I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago that this all took place.
In terms of the new Sousa Band, how has the repertoire changed over time? Is it just pieces that Sousa performed, or I have a recording of you guys where you guys did American Salute. And I've seen a program where you had variations on America. So how has that repertoire changed? Is it just been...
You know, the keeping things limited to Sousa's lifetime has been the basic thrust of the band. So we haven't, rarely have we played repertoire that was written after Sousa died, but occasionally, and you quoted some, we did. We were certainly capable of it, but we kept ourselves as a period group. If that makes any sense. But you definitely quoted one of the few occasions when we played something written after 1932.
Might as well reference
Death of Sousa.
Yeah. I guess favorite places that you've conducted the new Sousa Band. How many of those places were places that Sousa actually performed at? I would assume one of your favorites would be, I think I see pictures of on the new Sousa Band website of you guys when you guys went to Iowa to kind of have the celebration with the Meredith Willson. Was it the Centennial?
Oh yeah, that was fun.
So I guess what's your favorite place that you've conducted the new Sousa Band?
It's too many to talk about. Honestly, it's all over the country. Everyone was special, but everyone was different. I think if something was more memorable than anything else, it was the fact that one of the first ones we played was the Grand Opera House in Wilmington, Delaware, which was a hall where Sousa played a number of times. And I actually conducted 2 different Sousa performances in that historic hall. And that was the one for Goosebumps because, you know, for the first time, I'm realizing that we were doing this in a place Sousa actually performed, but then countless others.
I would say, I mean, I saw one of your concerts in 2002 in Lake Geneva. I actually have a photo with you and your autograph on what CD is it? It's the Stars and Stripes and Sousa recording that I got your autograph on. And I remember my dad came home. My dad was teaching at a middle school in Racine at the time. And he came home with like this pamphlet saying, oh, you guys were playing at the Music by the Lake in Lake Geneva. And then we had to get tickets. And I don't remember so much from the performance, but I remember like what was on the program. I think you guys did Light Cavalry Overture. You guys did the St. Sons march that I like. Did the Grainger's Irish tune. Did marches like Thunderer, Power and Glory, U.S. Field Artillery. Black Horse Troop, I think, was on there. New York Hippodrome, Liberty Bell, Semper Fidelis, of course, Wisconsin Forward Forever, and obviously Stars and Stripes. So that was I kind of have a little bit of a vivid memory of that concert.
Wisconsin Forward Forever is one of my all-time favorites, and we don't hear it very often, not often enough.
Okay. All right. So we might as well promote the book. Sousa Marches as you perform them. So for those who don't know, Sousa played his music probably more than any other composer. But specifically, he kind of published these differently than obviously he performed them. Published them for just, marching band, but he had his different interpretations. And during these times, you can probably kind of add on to these things, is that
sure.
Like conductor or composer kind of not really indicated in the score as much. These days, obviously, we have things like finale. I don't know why I was gonna say Finlandia somehow on that with that, but Sibelius, those type of programs where you can insert when a group is playing, you'll know, okay, when to play forte or in different dynamic markings. Those things weren't as much written down today as they were now. Obviously, it's like playing in the Marine Band where one thing is passed on from each player to player. Can we just kind of start with kind of that and then work our way through to kind of how these things were kind of, I guess, how you did things?
Well, everything was done. That's true. They played from march-sized parts that were scored for everybody playing to make as much noise outside as possible. Okay, that's how they were published, and those are the parts that the Sousa Band played from. Then, when they passed them out, Sousa would say to them, "No, don't do that. Do this," and he would make changes to various players' parts. The trumpet players would not play the first time through some strain of the march and then come in on the second time and so on and so on. Excuse me, I can't. My apologies.
You're good.
So, done. So he developed a way of publishing for marching bands so that everybody would play outdoors and make a lot of noise and play together. But for his own band, then he would change these arrangements to indoor performances, much more sophisticated, lighter sound, not so heavy, not everybody playing all the time. And these things were memorized by his players. Most of them just kept them in their mind and knew what to do. So for instance, the clarinets, the first time through a strain might play an octave lower than the part that they had written. And then the next time they would play it an octave higher. All kinds of things. There are dozens and dozens of these. And there were special ways that he played each of the marches that got passed down from one member to another. So there, you could call them Sousa's secret arrangements. Nobody could do them the same way as Sousa because they were never printed. And gradually over the years, these techniques of how he altered the marches from the printed music have survived, and we've collected all of those and put them together, and those are part of our performances as well with the new Sousa Band. And when I publish them, I put all of those things back into music. It's way more complicated than that. We could fill 5 shows talking about it. But
yeah, I was trying to think of kind of go through the book and kind of just get the general gist of everything. You know, basically it's how short notes were played, longer was louder, accent, you know.
Well, if I might interrupt you, that's a different thing. This is the printed music. How did they play the printed music? Well, the Sousa Band changed the printed music when they played it. So other bandmasters in his time were scratching their head. How does he get that sound? Because we buy the music and it doesn't sound that way. Sousa altered his own published music for his own performances. Okay, so there are 2 separate things. There are that is one, and then the other thing is that in the 1920s there was an absolutely different style that professional musicians used to perform music, and that has gone away in the intervening years, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. The way a normal professional musician would read music has changed dramatically. So with the new Sousa Band, we go back to the way earlier professional musicians read the part, which notes that they would make an emphasis on and which ones they might play a little louder, which ones they might play a little shorter than we play today, and things like that. So that's called performance practice. And the new Sousa Band specializes in the performance practice of the 1920s. So our players are trained to perform like 1920s musicians, not like modern musicians. So it's an interesting chess game anyway.
Okay. I guess obviously when you how did you kind of first learn about that? And obviously you went back to Yale and listened to some of the recordings of the Sousa Band, and what were you like most surprised by, or what did you learn the most from listening to those recordings of the Sousa Band, and what did you get from that?
Well, the first thing that I thought when I heard them was that they were all wrong. But then I realized, of course, that we were all wrong. It wasn't them. They were doing what they were supposed to do. So that was the first clue. Specifically, I was listening to the Sousa recording of the U.S. Field Artillery March, which was made in 1917, I believe. Uh, and we go da 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 da. But they're going ya da 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 da. The emphasis was on a different syllable. Okay, if they were punching different notes than we would ever do today, and that was kind of my Rosetta Stone. It was my light going on in my head. Oh, something is very different here. Why are they doing this? And then I began to study it and read about it and so on. And I realized that since the 1920s, there have been profound changes in the way an average musician reads a note on a page. It's remarkable how different things are. And so if you want the music to sound like the composer wanted it to sound, you have to know how they used to play, how an average player would play it in the 1920s or 1910s or something of that sort. And so I began studying that, and it was profoundly helpful to me as a conductor and a musician.
How helpful was kind of talking to the musicians that were still alive that played in Sousa's band at the time? When I talked to Loris, he brought up that both of you talked to was it Eddie Wall, who was the concert master of the Sousa band at one point. So how helpful were those conversations?
Oh, they're enormously helpful, like a light going off in my head. Eddie Wall, who lived in New York, unbeknownst to me at the time, I guess our concert was advertised. We did this Sousa recreation with the Yale band, and he got himself on a train from New York and came up to New Haven to the concert. I had never met him. I didn't know anything. And I met him after the concert. He was Sousa's concertmaster, principal clarinet of the Sousa Band. And I said, well, how are we doing? And he said, oh, I haven't heard the marches sound like that for 50 years. And I think he was being overly kind, because I don't think I knew then what I know now. But at any rate, he was very moved by the fact that we were trying to do the music the way Sousa had done it. And since then, I've learned so much more about it. But anyway, he was very kind, and I was very touched. He was a concertmaster of the Sousa Band, a principal clarinet, and then later on was principal clarinet of the Goldman Band in New York. So he was a real musician, and he was speaking like one. And it was a very profound moment in my development, in my interest in Sousa.
I guess obviously you and Loris have kind of worked together and separately on these arrangements.
Yep.
I got just asked about like Eddie, but like who else kind of in Sousa's band did you guys kind of talk to? Kind of when did those arrangements kind of start? Obviously you guys started with doing them with Barnhouse, and obviously Loris is now with Ludwig. So just kind of how did those arrangements kind of come out?
Well, we started on it together, and the arrangements, and I did some shopping. I talked to somebody who knew the publishing business, and I talked to a number of publishers, and I looked for some publisher that might be willing to publish modern versions of the way Sousa used to play these pieces. And after some time, we landed on Barnhouse, which is a little publishing house. No, it's not so little, in the middle of Iowa, in a cornfield, literally. And it was a wonderful thing, and it's turned out to be a great, great place for this music to be. And they're continuing to publish my versions of them. And Loris and I did, I don't know, 20 of them together. So it's been a wonderful thing. And now band directors can buy these things along with written material showing them how they were originally done.
I know we're going to talk about the Music for Wind Band series in the next segment of this, but are all of those arrangements that you've particularly done and some of the others that have been in that series, are all of those just are going to be released through Barnhouse, and the ones that Loris did?
Loris went off to another publishing house, and I don't know what plans he has and so on, what he's done. But yes, Barnhouse is continuing to do these, and I don't see any end in sight, and there are many, many of them to go.
Okay. Might as well hit on I wanted to kind of hit on I keep on asking Loris and Jason about kind of the foreshadowing in Sousa marches. Obviously the obvious example is Ferris to the Fair with the dun dun bum beam bum 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 bum. But I've noticed it in Foreshadowing Tower with the Woody Woodpecker thing in there. The Northern Pines has the dogfight lane right in the introduction. Are there any like what are some other? I'm just been curious about what are some of these other examples, and obviously some of them seem like maybe a little motif here and there. What are some other examples of the foreshadowing in Sousa's marches?
Sure. You know, I'm not, nothing's coming directly to mind, but I can give you the idea of this technique. He would compose the strains of the march. Usually there are 4 or 5 strains in a march. He would make notes and think of tunes and so on and walk around. And the last thing he would do, he'd compose the march, but the last thing he did when he composed a march was to compose the beginning. And he would make the beginning like an overture to what was to come. So he would take a little fragment of one part of the march and put it in one measure, and the next measure is a part of another part, or not always, but mostly that's what he did. So every bar in the introduction to Stars and Stripes Forever comes from a different part of the piece. And so it's like an overture to the march. And it was, in general terms, they were never composed until the march was composed. Then he would write the introduction out of little pieces of what he had already composed. So that's a story of his march introductions.
Okay. So it's kind of like, you know, Naval Reserve has the bump, 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 in the introduction a little bit. And like New Mexico has that little, in the introduction has that but before the O Fair New Mexico part. That's kind of in the introduction.
You're really into this. That's great.
Yeah. I try to find those. Sometimes when you're listening to all this music on a regular basis, you just try to find different, like what instruments are doing stuff where, and different approaches to kind of listen
Good
to
for
it.
You.
Might as well, obviously, we were talking about, we might as well get into the structure. You kind of briefly kind of talked about, but for those who don't know, obviously, the main structure. The neat thing is that I would suggest kind of go for people that got to listen to the new Marine Band series where they kind of go chronological order to, and they're finishing that right now. But kind of the structure, how can we talk about kind of the structure and how Sousa's marches changed over time? Because obviously it kind of started with there were more da capo marches when he kind of started writing marches to what we know today with like Stars and Stripes, where it's an introduction, first strain, second strain, the trio, the dogfight, and then the trio again, dogfight, trio. How have you kind of seen that change?
Well, the biggest thing was that when he first started out, typically a march would go all the way through and then go back to the beginning, and it would repeat the first 2 sections and then stop. So it never ended at the end. It always ended at the middle, if that makes any sense. They would play the whole thing to the end, go back to the beginning, and then stop in the middle of the march. That was the end of the march, because it was going back to the original key, and it would end in the original key. And I can't tell you exactly when he began moving out of that, but like the modern marches, start in one key, and they end in another key, generally a fourth higher than the key that it started. That's more typical of his later marches. So his thinking about that evolved through his career.
Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah. Then this section with kind of the about Paul Barley, who obviously wrote a couple books on Sousa. The main 3 are the works of Sousa, which is being redone by Loris to kind of have some of these other newly discovered pieces into that.
I didn't know that, but that's terrific.
There's the Incredible Band of Sousa, which is I have that one. It's huge. and then the one I mentioned before. But obviously, can you kind of talk about how much Paul Byerly, who did all this research and has had how much of an impact he's had on you and kind of getting into Sousa?
Oh, he's a wonderful man. He was an aeronautical engineer in Columbus, Ohio, tuba player, and got curious about the stories behind these marches and started to collect them and finally wrote a book on it, and two books actually. One was a history of the Sousa Band. The other was a little story about each of the pieces that Sousa wrote, as best he could do. It's called The Works of John Philip Sousa. And these things are the Bible for Loris and for myself and everybody else. They're brilliantly done. So what more can I say except I owe everything to Paul. He was a tuba player.
I was going to also add that the copy that I had of it's actually a nice, you get a kick out of this story. My parents and my dad played in one of my first exposures to Sousa was the Racing Concert Band. My dad played in that group for years and years and years, and Del Ice, who served as director, would always close with Stars and Stripes on the summer concerts. They did an indoor series where they would bring in like notable guests, like Brian Bowman. One of the guests was Patricia Backus, who was tried to do a reincarnation of like the female Sousa, I guess. And we met her after the concert. She talked about you should go see the University of Illinois Sousa archives. So the summer that I saw your band live, I actually also got to go to the archives. But I impressed whoever was working there at the time. I don't know who she was new, but she gave me a free copy of Paul's Works of Sousa book, and then I was able. She let me kind of pick something from the archives. For some reason I picked the trombone part of Hands Across the Sea because I was starting trombone a little bit that next fall. So that's kind of one of my things on connections to the Paul Byerly thing.
That's nice. That's a great story.
Okay, so now we're gonna shift over to the Music for Wind Band series. For those who don't know, it's going to be the last two volumes have not been released yet, but 21 of the volumes have been released. How did that kind of series come about? Were you approached by somebody at Naxos that wanted to do that, or did the 3 orchestral CDs kind of be a big predecessor to that series?
They were definitely a predecessor. I can't remember everything about it. I remember Klaus Heyman is sort of the genius behind Naxos. He lives in Hong Kong, and he got this idea that he would record, when he recorded the music of a composer, he would record everything the composer wrote. And so he began hiring orchestras mostly in the East Bloc, in the communist countries of Eastern Europe, where he could get them cheaply, and he would just go to a composer and record everything he wrote. So somebody said, you should write to him and see if he wants to do Sousa. So I did. I wrote him a letter, and he said, yes, send me a list of everything he wrote and we'll record it. And I couldn't believe it. And then as the discussion continued, we got talking about, well, what band is going to record it? And, I don't know. I have to explain this. Because of the American Federation of Musicians, the cost of recording with anybody in the United States is extremely high. It's the most expensive place in the world to make a recording. And so most recording is done in Europe. So then Klaus Heyman got this idea, well, we'll get you groups in Europe. So we started out by recording with orchestras in Europe. I've lost track of how many CDs we did, including 3 of Sousa marches and other Sousa concert pieces. And gradually then we got a band in England, a couple of bands in England that would record the complete works of Sousa, and we have finished that project. It's going to be 23 CDs. I think CDs number 22 and 23 have yet been released, but as you have all 21 of the ones that have been released.
Yep, I do.
The last two are with the Band of the Royal Marines, and I'm trying to think which band. There are 5 bands of the Royal Marines in England, but one of them did the last 2 recordings. And they're already done and they'll be released shortly.
Okay. I guess going off of that, I'm gonna scroll down a little bit. How much of that music, of the other music of Sousa, had you conducted on tour with groups such as the new Sousa Band prior to that series? And how much of that music so far in the series was like new to you prior to the project? And what have you learned most since that project?
Well, since I recorded the complete works, most of those scores I learned for the recordings, and you know, I knew all Stars and Stripes and all the ones that people typically do. I had known those as a college band director, as a high school band director, and then gradually conducting more and more with professional players. So I knew a lot of the stuff, but not. I wouldn't say I knew half of it, because I actually ended up recording everything that he published for band, not his arrangements, but all of his original works for band. And it took us 23 CDs to record all of it.
Okay. I guess is like, if there were to be like somebody else to kind of do another series, would it be the arrangements, or would it be at some point kind of, I would like to see somebody do the vocal stuff, like, and do all the operettas and do some, that would be kind of a neat thing.
That would be a neat thing. That's a great idea.
All right.
Lovely idea. But you need singers that can do that style and so on. I've done, I don't know, a dozen or more of the Sousa songs for orchestra or for band, and I love them. I mean, they're all very special. After all, he wrote all those, what were essentially Broadway musicals. What I don't know the exact number anymore. I think 13 of them or something. They're complete operettas, full evening of entertainment. So it's like each one is over 2 hours of music. It's a tremendous amount of music, and it's charming, absolutely wonderful. I have conducted concert versions of El Capitan with orchestras. Did one with the Pittsburgh Symphony, where we do all the main songs and incidental music from the show.
All right, so I'm gonna do kind of what I did with both Jason and Loris for this next section, and I'm gonna kind of give you my top 20 or so Sousa marches. I realized when I did this with Jason that I left one off of my top 20 that I'm very fond of.
Well, let's start with it.
So I'm gonna start with my honorable mentions.
Okay.
All right, so I got Kansas Wildcats, the Daughters of Texas, Pride of Pittsburgh, Pride of the Wolverines, Globe and Eagle, Sound Off, Corcoran Cadets, the Legionnaires. I'm bumping off of my top 20 to add the one I want to add into my top 20. Prince Charming, Homeward Bound, and the Federal. And then I'm going to go to my 11 through 20 from Black Horse Troop, the Naval Reserve was the one I forgot to add into here. The Golden Jubilee, the Channing Man's March, the White Rose, La Flor de Sevilla, Atlantic City Pageant, Invincible Eagle, which is one of your favorites.
Yeah.
Wisconsin Forward Forever, because obviously I'm from Wisconsin, and then Fairest to the Fair. So of that first kind of batch of things, are there any surprises?
Oh, I don't know. I like them all. You know, you won't get me on that one. They're all good. If you like them, that's what matters, if they got through to you. Like Wisconsin Forward Forever is hardly known. You know that? I mean, it's known, it's known in Wisconsin because it's a fight song for the university, but it's really not well known nationally, and it's a great march.
Yeah, I was attending.
Also, pardon me, it's not actually, to my knowledge, it's not published in a good version the way Sousa did it, which is another bad thing about the march.
I was gonna add that I was at a Wisconsin Badgers basketball game recently, but it landed on Wisconsin's homecoming. So I was emailing the whoever succeeded Mike Leckrone at the University of Wisconsin about if the Badger band was going to be at they're playing. I'm a UW Whitewater alum, so they do an exhibition against one of the Division III schools, and I was hoping the Badger band would be there, so I was trying to say to him, hey, could you play Wisconsin Forward Forever for me, because I'm a huge Sousa nut. And then they had to do the homecoming parade, so they weren't at that game. So hopefully I'll be able to hear them play that. But I'm going to go to my top 10.
I think it's a great Sousa March. I would say, I would pick it as one of the most undervalued ones by band directors, because it's a truly great march.
Okay. My top 10, I'm a journalist, so I have Washington Post in my top 10. The University of Illinois March is in my top 10. The Gallant Seventh. A little bit of a surprise here would be the Untitled March. I've told both Loris and Jason this. I think that's the most beautiful trio in a Sousa March.
Oh, that's good. I like it.
The Glory of the Yankee Navy and the Diplomat, because of the low brass stuff. Specifically the tuba parts. I put Stars and Stripes as my number 4. Pathfinder of Panama is my number 3. Nobles of the Mystic Shrine is my number 2. And I kind of recently decided this, and it kind of came out of left field for Jason, is that my favorite one is the New Mexico March.
Oh, okay. Okay, it's a lot of fun.
So I guess any of that, does that top one kind of surprise you, or any of that top 10?
No, I mean, everybody has their own. You know, I'm crazy about the Invincible Eagle. It even made it my email address.
Okay. I guess any of those like other compositions that are kind of that you're very fond of, or like stuff from the suites or any of that?
You know, after recording the complete works, it's hard for me to say. I really, you know, it's whatever I'm conducting next. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I can't. I'd have trouble. I'd have trouble.
Okay.
I kind of picked Invincible Eagle as my number 1. Okay.
Okay. I definitely kind of side with kind of some stuff from the suites. I'd say I like Mars and Venus. I've kind of been paying attention more to the layering of some things in that last section of how he kind of puts one melody over the other. I kind of also noticed that in volume 21, where there's some layering with what's it called? The Sisterhood of the States.
Yeah.
Has a little bit of that. One of my favorite things from the suites is the middle movement of Dwellers of the Western World, where it introduces Messiah of the Nations, but it's just kind of a mix of lighter and energetic music in that. I like Jazz America. I like the two humor, like the Swanee humoresque and Look for the Silver Lining humoresque. So
fantastic. You know, it blows my mind how much he did and how well he did it. You know, both the writing is so, when you study the scores, the writing is so meticulous. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He's never fishing around for what he wanted. He hears it completely. It's a joy to work with it, and inspiring too.
Okay, so we're gonna move away from Sousa for the next couple sections. Jim Ripley says that you have quite the Grainger collection. We talked in a phone call on how that kind of came about, but where did that kind of passion start for you? Obviously, you've kind of written arrangements on different composers, whether it's been Percy Grainger. You also done some Victor Herbert stuff for Naxos and Alan Hovhannes, if I'm correct.
That's great. Good for you.
Where did that passion start for you?
And you left out Charles Ives.
Oh yeah, the intercollegiate and Omega Lambda Chi, and there's a Charles Ives piece that that Jim did with Carthage bands that I really liked, that involved a brass quintet. That was that's one of my favorite pieces, Variations on Jerusalem the Golden.
That's my arrangement that I made. Yeah, that's another one. It's a good one. That was originally played by the Danbury Band when Charles was growing up, in very early work. But it's beautiful. I don't know. I just had a very early passion for Ives and for Grainger and for Alan Hovhaness, and those things were what moved me along. And then when I was at Yale, I did this Sousa program, and I got very involved in it. And I've been deeply involved in it ever since. But those four composers have been kind of bookends of my career.
Can you talk about that collection a little bit and how that kind of came about?
What collection?
The Percy Grainger, where you kind of have, if not the most complete.
Well, what happened there was that Percy died. Excuse me, I have to clear my throat. Excuse me. I was in Caldwell, New Jersey, in northern New Jersey, and Grainger lived in White Plains, so it was only an hour and a half away from my house. And I got to drive over there and meet Mrs. Grainger and so on. And Percy had an extensive library in his basement in his house. I didn't see it at the time, but then I heard that Mrs. Grainger, after Percy died, needed to get all this music out of the house. I mean, she couldn't deal with it. It was, I don't know how to quantify it, but a huge amount of music, complete sets of parts for things that he had written and so on. They were all over the basement. So she had a truck come and take all the stuff in Grainger's basement, and Uppsala College, she was Swedish, and Uppsala College in East Orange, New Jersey, was Swedish. So for some reason, she gave them all to the library at Uppsala College in East Orange, New Jersey. So almost everything Grainger had written, including a lot of music that hadn't been published, went to this library at Uppsala College in East Orange, New Jersey. So a mutual friend, Daniel Leeson, who was a friend of Ella's, he was talking to her about it. And he said, well, she people then started to ask her for copies of the music, but it was in this place in East Orange, which she couldn't get to. So they decided, this friend of mine who knew Ella said, well, Keith Brion lives near there. Why don't you have him go and service it? So if somebody wants a certain piece, he can drive down to the library and get it and send it to them. So that's what happened. I was a high school band director about, 20 miles away from this library, or 15. And one day I got the key to this room in the stacks of the library. And I don't know, the room was just a normal size, like a living room, but it was just full of these boxes of Percy's music. Percy actually made the boxes. That's a long story, but he made the boxes by hand and painted things on the side, and they were very interesting. But everything that he had written, including lots and lots of unpublished music, was in this room. And so here I am, a high school band director. I knew enough to know, I never heard of this piece. I never heard of this piece. I never heard of this piece. What is this? Grainger wrote this? We all knew Irish Tune and all of those things, but here are all this music. So I can't think right offhand of what year it was, maybe in the 60s or 70s. I go down to this library and they give me a key to this room, and there it is. I walk in, it's like, I don't know, an oil well or Fort Knox or whatever you want to use as an analogy. I was blown away. And they let me take 1 or 2 boxes back to my high school. And I passed out, let's say I passed out Prelude in the Dorian mode. I was curious, what is that? I never heard of this. And my high school band played it. It was fantastic. I went crazy. It was wonderful. And this happened over and over again. And I gradually began to get these pieces published. I can't remember how many pieces went through this process of going to the Caldwell, New Jersey high school band, and then eventually ending up with a publisher, and people know it today as a published piece. But that was the transition of a lot of Percy's music from White Plains to East Orange, New Jersey, and then finally to Caldwell, New Jersey, where my high school band was, and eventually published. So I should sit down someday and write this down. I haven't ever done that.
I was gonna bring up before we kind of talk about maybe favorite Grainger pieces. My Grainger story was, I think, my senior year of high school. I was in Passetti's Music, which is one of the music stores in Kenosha, and I was going through the piano music, and I strolled upon a piano book of all Percy Grainger music, and I was like, man, I'd like to see, like, thought, I bought it, and I was doing piano lessons with my piano teacher at the time was Sue Childers, and I wanted to do one of them. So we ended up doing the one that was easiest for me to play was Molly on the Shore. So I wanted to play all 15 pages
That's
of it.
not
But
easy.
we did. But we did. It's not an easy piano arrangement, but we kind of cut it from like the beginning and part of the ending. So that's kind of my Grainger thing.
But that's fun. That's really great. That's a great story.
So I guess kind of if I had to say kind of what my favorite Grainger things, obviously you have Irish Tune, Country Gardens, Shepherd's Hay, Gumsuckers, the Children's March, Over the Hills and Far Away. I think obviously Lincolnshire Posy is a masterpiece. But I'd say like one of my other favorite Grainger things is what is it? One of the movements from the Danish folk song suite. I don't might be the Judas melody.
Oh yeah, you just yeah.
So I was just wondering, like, what are some of those great? Obviously, in terms of suit. What's your Invincible Eagle for some of the Percy Grainger stuff?
That's pretty hard. That's really hard. I want to back out on that. I love everything. It's crazy. I got the opportunity to record an all Grainger recording with the Slovak Radio Orchestra. That was a great moment for me. And my favorite Irish tune. They went crazy. The Slovak players went crazy over Irish tune. They had never heard anything like it. And all these great string players that were doing the recording. It was, very fine professional players. And that's my favorite Grainger recording I ever did, was on Naxos, an Irish tune for string orchestra and four horns.
Okay. This next section is I want to kind of get away from Sousa and Grainger, and we're gonna make sure that we don't touch the drum set with this one. But for those who don't know, one of Keith's sons is also had a career in music and is a film composer. Some of the most noteworthy movies, The Other Guys, the Christopher Robin movie from 2018. And obviously that thing I just referenced was part of the movie Step Brothers. So how proud are you of your son, John, and his musical career, especially that he's kind of dabbled in writing music for film?
Oh, it blows my mind. It's wonderful. I'm just thrilled about it. And he's also a great performer. He does a stand-up single for 20 years. He's been playing in clubs once a week in Los Angeles, has a huge following. He just gets up and starts to play anything, takes requests, and it's mind-blowing.
Does he have any relationship with John Williams at all, or?
I don't know. It never came up. We never had that discussion.
Okay. I guess anything else you want to?
Not, I don't know. He's had quite a life in LA, and I can't even imagine how many people he's met and what that is. All of that has been involved.
Okay. This last section, how has music changed for you during the pandemic? How have you kind of tried to keep busy? I'll start with that question.
I just enjoy listening. I'm in my late 80s now, I'm just letting life go by. I've had a great life and made I don't know how many recordings, and it's just been a wonderful career. I'm still publishing music with Barnhouse and Sousa versions and so on. I can't tell you how many recordings I've done. It's I don't know, 20 or 30.
Okay. As we slowly get back to normalcy, do you anticipate getting back to things like conducting the new Sousa Band? And then I obviously am hoping that we can get you to come to Kenosha for the Kenosha Pop Centennial and this next summer. In terms of getting back to guest conducting. So it's do you anticipate those things?
The new Sousa Band is expensive, even if the players get just a token of what they deserve to be paid. So coming up with the money for an engagement for new Sousa Band would be a miracle right now. I mean, I don't see how the mechanics of the whole thing are going to work. If it did, I'd be the first to jump up and down and be happy. So I'm not sure what's in the future. It's been a wonderful career. I'm pretty much done with my recording career. That whole thing is over with the 2 more volumes to come out with Naxos for the complete Sousa, but they're all recorded. So I don't know, I'm still publishing music for bands to play, and I do 2 or 3 pieces a year. That's kind of where I am at this point. Not much going on in performance music right now, anywhere in the country. You know that.
Yeah.
And so how that ends and how it starts into something else, I can only hope that something good happens.
Okay. So Keith, it's been an honor to interview one of my favorite conductors. Obviously, I have most of your recordings. I absolutely hope that we can figure out something for this next year. I know it's in the discussions. They're trying to figure out what they want to do for the centennial season. And having you as a guest conductor is definitely in the consideration.
You know, I have 2 or 3 women that perform with me when I do Sousa concerts to perform the soprano role. And one of them, Virginia Crossbury, is from Kenosha. She's a fabulous singer.
Yeah, the interesting connection that I have to her is that there's somebody I went to middle school with who I think that's her aunt.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it's kind of like she was hanging out with her aunt, and I was like, wait, is your aunt Virginia? And I was like, oh, I have this recording of her singing Victor Herbert songs with Keith Brion. And then she was just kind of honored that I had that recording. So
she's a fabulous performer, fabulous musician, and really wonderful person. So she's been performing with me for, I think, at least for 20 years, both in Europe and here in the United States.
All right, Keith, thanks for talking to me. And this podcast is going to end on the audio side with Sousa's Late March George Washington Bicentennial.
All right. That's a terrific one. Great.
All right, cool.